This is the story of a company that desperately wanted to become AAA, or rather, quadruple A.
The world's greatest arcade video game.
The Atari 7800. More games at about half the price.
It's 1986. Five brothers with a computer hardware and software distribution business in Brittany, France, decided to take a swing at a brand new industry. They are not coders, they are not tech wizards, they're just a family with a knack for spotting opportunities. Their names, the Guillemets, and the man leading the charge, Yves Guillemot. This is where Ubisoft as we know it begins, not with a bang, but with a realization. The video game market is growing fast, and they went in. Ubisoft's first release, Zombie, wasn't a masterpiece. It was a clunky survival game that barely made a ripple, selling just over 5,000 copies. But it didn't need to. For Yves, it was proof that Ubisoft could crack the gaming market. And so they did. By 1995, Ubisoft had its first real breakout. Nintendo had Mario, Sega had Sonic, and for Ubisoft, enter Rayman, a quirky, limbless little hero dreamed up by a young Michel Hansel.
Rayman is a brutally unforgiving platformer with a minuscule amount of lives compared to the skill level expected of you. It's an incredibly well designed game, creating one of the most engaging platforming experiences.
Bright, bold, and brimming with charm, Rayman wasn't just a hit, it was a signal. Ubisoft wasn't content to stay small. They were chasing something bigger, much bigger. Yves had a vision: AAA gaming, blockbusters, global domination. So by 1996, Ubisoft went public. With an $80 million cash injection, they expanded aggressively, opening studios across the world. But there was a problem. Despite having a growing list of published titles, Ubisoft lacked major in-house franchises. Outside of Rayman and its stellar sequel, The Great Escape, they didn't have a true blockbuster, especially one that could break the American market. The Guillemets, however, were always thinking ahead. They didn't just anticipate the rise of video games, they foresaw something even bigger: mobile gaming and free-to-play monetization. In 1999, as the internet spread across Europe, Michel and Gerard Guillemot, two of the brothers, founded Gameloft, a mobile and free-to-play gaming company. In its early days, Gameloft specialized in mobile Java-based adaptations of popular titles for devices like the Nokia N-Gage. Some of those titles would go on to be licensed from Ubisoft, allowing both companies to generate revenue from the same IPs. And it paid off. That same year, Ubisoft's stock went up five-fold, and with an extra $170 million to work with, they were acquiring studios, snatching up IPs, and transforming into a true development powerhouse. And so, the Golden Age hit. From the Prince of Persia: Sands of Time trilogy,
Give me the dagger. You cannot change your fate.
to Splinter Cell and Chaos Theory, and from the many Ghost Recons to the many Rainbow Sixes, game after game, year after year, Ubisoft was on fire. Their titles were polished, highly rated, and commercially successful, with many still considered some of the greatest games of all time. They had mastered their niches, and they were selling millions. But not everything was smooth sailing. Michel Ansel's new IP, Beyond Good and Evil, in 2003, was loved by critics and fans, but a commercial disaster. It was Ubisoft's first major flop. Yet, it cemented their reputation as a company willing to take creative risks. Alan Core, Ubisoft's managing director, had this to say about taking risks. If you don't do risks, you don't exist. Apart from Electronic Arts, who are not taking many risks because they can afford not to. If you have a brand, you can live on the brand you have and do the minimum job. It will sell a certain amount, but damage the franchise, and sales will fall. Behind the scenes, however, Ubisoft and Gameloft partnership continued. licensing the now vastly popular IPs like Splinter Cell and Prince of Persia. Effectively, Ubisoft was dominating the high-end gaming market, PC, consoles, while Gameloft cornered the emerging mobile space, squeezing revenue from every possible angle through licensing fees. All the while, both companies remained within the family. It was a brilliant play, and almost no one noticed. For now, Ubisoft's reputation was bulletproof. They weren't the biggest fish in the pond, not yet, but they would soon roll the dice on something that would change everything. Assassin's Creed 2007. This was the gamble, a brand new IP, untested and overly ambitious. Originally conceived as a Prince of Persia sequel, it evolved into something bolder, a clash between assassins and Templars, blending Ubisoft's strengths, stealth, platforming, and the new open-world exploration. Its biggest innovation? Parkour. As Altair, if you could see it, you could climb it. But the game wasn't perfect.
The first half of Assassin's Creed is a truly clairvoyant experience. You've never played anything like it. The sagacious story, incalculable crowd interaction, and unprecedented freedom to traverse the environment how you choose are landmark moments. Over time, repetition rears its ugly head. Combat becomes a necessary routine, and dim-witted foes snatch you out of the Third Crusade and remind you that you're playing a game. The potential here is undeniable, but there's been some dust swept under the rug that places a blemish on an otherwise beautiful piece of art.
Assassin's Creed was a template that just needed refinement, and it was also effortlessly marketable. The rich, realistic setting, almost one-for-one crafted cities, hooded assassins, hidden blades, huge NPC population for the time, leaps of faith into bales of hay. It was badass and revolutionary, and the players loved it. By 2009, Assassin's Creed had shattered expectations, selling over 8 million copies. And with its animus-driven setup, diving into the memories of long-lost ancestors, Ubisoft had something more than just a hit. They had a franchise. And if there was one thing Ubisoft knew how to do well, it was franchises.
My name is Ezio Auditore da Firenze. Like my father before me, I am an assassin.
2009, Assassin's Creed 2. This wasn't a prototype anymore. This was near perfection. Ezio, the smirking, charismatic Renaissance assassin, took everything Altair fumbled and made it better. Smoother parkour, more immersive cities, built to perfection to its real counterparts, a gripping story and writing. But more than that, Assassin's Creed 2 was a true beginning of Ubisoft's signature open-world formula. A large sprawling map, landmarks to climb to uncover the said map, and a world filled with a litany of side quest markers and completionist-oriented objectives like chests to open, feathers or pages to collect to keep players engaged as they parkoured throughout the city, turning Assassin's Creed 2 not just into a hit, but also an influential title, selling over 10 million copies and cementing itself as one of the best in the franchise. Ubisoft had perfected the formula, but at the same time, they also made their first major misstep. With Assassin's Creed 2 on PC released a few months later in 2010, Ubisoft introduced Uplay, a service meant to unify all their games and in time cut out Steam entirely and optimize their revenue.
Uplay is designed to enhance your experience with the Ubisoft games you love to play. From accomplishments within the game to the way you share those accomplishments with the world. Uplay will reward you for doing what you already do.
But with Uplay came something far more controversial, always on DRM. No internet, no game. Connection drops, progress is wiped. Forums exploded with outrage. Boycotts started. Boycotters screed, don't buy it or pirate it. Then disaster struck. On launch weekend, Ubisoft servers were DDoS'd, attacked, leaving thousands unable to play for 6 hours. Then it happened again. The complaints poured in. Login failures, crashes, negative reviews. I've had this game for a few days now, but I haven't been able to play it for more than an hour at a time yet because of the permanent internet connection that is required to play the game. Sometimes it is my provider having issues, and sometimes it is Ubisoft telling me that my username and password is not correct. This is just not acceptable. The worst part? Ubisoft openly admitted they would only remove the DRM if it was cracked. And so, within a month, hackers hacked Uplay and soon released a fully bypassed version, removing the always online requirement entirely. By December 2010, they softened the DRM, requiring only a one-time activation, but it took them 2 years to remove it completely. But the message was clear. Ubisoft chose to prioritize their profits and protect their IP, which was completely legitimate, mind you, but maybe they didn't have the best intentions in mind when it came to their consumers. And this was just the beginning. Despite the growing anti-consumer sentiment, which to be fair was limited to PC users, Ubisoft had found their golden goose, and they weren't about to let it go. With the success of Assassin's Creed 2, they launched Brotherhood and Revelations, completing Ezio's amazing saga. Same formula, different cities, minor gameplay additions. But there was something impressive. They were releasing these games every single year, on top of their other franchises. Brotherhood and Revelations each went on to sell over 7 million copies. Ubisoft had hit peak AAA status, rivaling EA and Activision's yearly releases. We are challenging EA and Activision, certainly, if we keep our focus on delivering high-quality games and on attracting and retaining top talent. I'm confident we'll reach that goal of becoming number one. On top of that, remember Gameloft? By 2008, the increasing use of smartphones changed absolutely everything. The rise of app stores made digital purchases easier than ever, and Gameloft pivoted. They stopped relying on Ubisoft's brands and instead developed their own. Asphalt, Modern Combat, Dungeon Hunter, Gangstar, Crime City, many were thinly disguised clones of major franchises, but they thrived, selling over 200 million copies by 2009, and with them came something far more lucrative: micro-transactions. Time savers, in-game currency, pay-to-win mechanics, monetization designed to keep players spending. At the time, the broader gaming industry was starting to experiment with these tactics, but Ubisoft, they were paying very close attention.
Our first motivation was to work with great people and have fun. 25 years later, we've been able to ship more than 500 million games and entertain millions. Not bad for a company which first product had no arms and no legs. So I want to thank all of you for your support over the years.
Meanwhile, their empire was growing at an incredible pace. By 2013, Ubisoft's workforce had exploded to over 5,000 employees, with Ubisoft Montreal alone nearing 3,000 employees, making it the biggest gaming studio in the world. But success breeds confidence, confidence breeds complacency, and for Ubisoft, Assassin's Creed soon wouldn't be just a franchise anymore, but the foundation of their empire, one they would soon rely on far too heavily. And even worse, another element arose: greed.
Did I ever tell you what the definition of insanity is? Insanity is doing the exact same fucking thing over and over again, expecting shit to change.
A year later, in 2012, Ubisoft didn't just release another Assassin's Creed and Ghost Recon, they also launched a new entry in the Far Cry franchise: and Vaas' infamous definition of insanity would end up being quite poetic for Ubisoft's trajectory going forward. Far Cry 3 featured a captivating villain that instantly hooked players, Vaas. It offered a massive open-world playground with satisfying gunplay and stealth mechanics. In many ways, it felt like an Assassin's Creed FPS, in ways more than one, climbing towers, clearing out enemy outposts, and a heavy emphasis on side activities like hunting, gathering, and crafting, tying themselves partially to your character progression. These were all hallmarks of the so-called Ubisoft formula, echoing in Assassin's Creed 3 that same year. Far Cry 3 went on to sell over 10 million copies, vastly outperforming its more unique predecessor, Far Cry 2, and despite its similarities to Assassin's Creed, fans embraced it. For the time, it still felt new, enough, and most importantly, fun. But then we got Far Cry 4 2 years later. New villain, new location, but the exact same gameplay loop. Still selling over 10 million copies. Then Far Cry Primal dropped in 2016, and despite being set in the Stone Age, players quickly realized it was not only the same game with the same gameplay loop, but the same map layout as Far Cry 4. The formula had become a meme. Still, Primal sold well enough. Ubisoft had secured yet another reliable franchise for easy revenue. But while Far Cry was becoming repetitive, the real signs of Ubisoft's growing greed appeared in their flagship franchise, Assassin's Creed. Although the sentiment over Assassin's Creed 3 has improved over the years, its initial reception back in 2012 wasn't entirely positive. This is not a bad game, however, it's not the epic we thought it would be. Ubisoft claimed it would be 80% a new IP, but it really is just more of the same old, same old. There's a lot to do, just don't go into it thinking of something groundbreaking. It's AC, but in America. Still, through that lukewarm reception, AC3 was also criticized for its technical issues and bugs, and for the first time, fans started to express concern about the franchise's increasingly demanding annual release cycle.
However, I felt like the last 5-10% of this game was just like, oh, wrapped up, end. I really think they ran out of time and they wanted to get this game out by the holiday season, so they're like, come on, wrap it up, wrap up the story, wrap up everything. There are still glitches and bugs in the game, doesn't matter, the holiday season sticks around for nobody, wrap the game up. So some of the glitches and bugs weren't worked out and the game just ended.
But when Yves Guillemot was asked whether too many releases were diluting the brand, his response was simple. They are necessary to satisfy demand. And he wasn't wrong. Despite everything, Assassin's Creed 3 was the best-selling AC game at the time, moving over 12 million copies. But something else was creeping in, something that would completely reshape Ubisoft's future. With the rise of online gaming, multiplayer had first been introduced in Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. AC3 was no different, featuring a multiplayer mode with a progression system. And this is where we saw it for the first time, a paid shortcut, allowing players to buy upgrades with Erudito credits.
This time around, they allow you to avoid a lot of this unlocking process with this, the Erudito credit system, which allows you to buy Erudito credits from Ubisoft, and then you can unlock any item or ability, I believe, below level 50 utilizing this.
But it was fine, right? It was just optional. Just don't use it, just don't buy it, right?
While some core mechanics could still be improved, Black Flag's story, world, and systems come together to form a markedly better and more cohesive game than Assassin's Creed 3.
Black Flag delivers a world brimming with gorgeous places to go, amazing secrets to discover, and nefarious pirates to stab.
If there was ever a question that Assassin's Creed needed something ambitious to get the series back on track, Black Flag is that game and then some.
In 2013, Ubisoft fully embraced the Assassin's Creed 3 naval battles, and players loved it. To many, Black Flag was the last great Assassin's Creed game. It still had the Ubisoft open-world formula, but sailing across the Caribbean, raiding enemy ships and managing your own ship made it fresh and exciting.
Deliver, Johnny, deliver. Tomorrow ye will get your pay, and it's time for us to leave her.
But beneath the surface, something else was creeping in. Following in AC3's footsteps, Black Flag introduced something new, this time to its single-player campaign.
Final upgrades on the ship definitely feel a little too grindy, except, look. Conveniently, Ubisoft will sell you a DLC pack to unlock those pesky upgrade plans automatically.
Time-saving boosters, pay-to-skip mechanics, the start of something much bigger. And it must have worked, because just a year later, Ubisoft doubled down. Unity launched in 2014 with even more microtransactions, time-saver packs, map reveals, revealing the location of its many side activities through Helix credits. Why? Well, according to a Ubisoft VP, quote, Ubisoft has come to recognize that some players have more money than time. This wasn't a design flaw, it was a business model. Of course, Ubisoft wasn't alone in this. EA had done the same thing with Dead Space 3 just a year prior, shamelessly offering upgrades through the in-game upgrade bench. But Ubisoft was different. They had introduced microtransactions so carefully and gradually that hardly anyone pushed back. But some voices clearly stated the issue.
I said it for Dead Space 3 and I'll say it again for any other game that tries to pull this nonsense. I cannot trust you not to mess with the in-game resource system if the temptation of pushing microtransactions on the players is there. I can't trust you to do that. I have no idea what you did to the pacing of the progression and the gathering of the various in-game currencies because you decided to muddy the water with microtransactions, so I cannot trust you.
And to make the deal even sweeter, Assassin's Creed Unity launched in an absolutely broken state. Game-breaking bugs, nightmarish facial glitches, terrible performance. For many, the game was unplayable. It's Assassin's Creed with lots of bugs, a shocking frame rate, and microtransactions of up to $100. Enjoy! Another game pushed to the market before it was ready for release. Keep up the good work, Ubisoft. You'll be taking away EA's golden turd in no time, at this rate. And yet, despite it all, it still sold over 10 million copies. Ubisoft then provided the first DLC for free or Season Pass holders with a free game as an apology to its terrible launch, with users saying, "Fuck, I should have bought the Season Pass. Yeah, I'm feeling blown. I don't suppose I could buy it now and still get Far Cry 4 for free." So in 2015, Ubisoft did it again. Assassin's Creed Syndicate was better polished than Unity, with 2 playable protagonists, a new grappling hook, but it was more of the same. And for the first time in a franchise, just like in Primal, the sales suffered. With Unity's disastrous launch fresh in players' minds, Syndicate sold just 5 million copies, half of what Unity had done. For the first time in years, there was no Assassin's Creed game in 2016. Instead, they promised to step back and re-examine the franchise. And as Ubisoft hit the brakes, all 3 original creators, Jade Raymond, Corey May, and Patrice Desilets, had progressively been leaving the company. The minds that built Assassin's Creed were now gone. At this point, many players were checking out of Ubisoft games entirely. The formula was predictable, and the phrase "if you played one, you played them all" became more common. But millions still loved the gameplay loop, be the slow progression, the map clearing, endless side content. It was addictive. It was like comfort food. You knew exactly what to expect. And on top of that, the marketing was always compelling. A new historical or unique setting, or a new massive open world. It was enough to keep players intrigued. But there was a limit, and Ubisoft was dangerously close to hitting it. Or were they really? Because while all of this was happening back in 2012, they had taken another gamble, one that would stain their trust forever. In 2012, Ubisoft unveiled Watch Dogs, their answer to Grand Theft Auto, but with a hacker twist. A glimpse at the future with the first game demo video of Watch Dogs, said the description. With all their resources, all their talent, maybe this could be true. The first gameplay demo stunned gamers. The visuals were breathtaking, the animations lifelike, and the idea of hacking an entire city at your fingertips, it was revolutionary. Hype skyrocketed, millions watched in awe. It became one of Ubisoft's most pre-ordered games ever. But it was all a lie. When Watch Dogs finally launched in 2014, it was aggressively mediocre. Forums exploded with side-by-side comparisons, proving just how much had been changed. Ubisoft denied any downgrade, but reality said otherwise. And as if that wasn't enough, Ubisoft's infamous Uplay service, forced onto all their games, was completely broken at launch. Again. Yet, despite everything, Watch Dogs still sold over 10 million copies. But something had changed. Some gamers no longer trusted Ubisoft's promises. They had seen behind the curtain, but Ubisoft, they had already figured out how to keep the hype machine running.
And the real truth is, no one watched, no one saw, wanted to see. Tragedy is invisible. People turn away from it and run from it if they can.
The Division, a gripping cinematic trailer, a chilling outbreak consuming New York, and then a gameplay trailer, carefully orchestrated, stage voiceovers, strategic camera angles, and the cherry on top, the closing door animation. The internet lost its mind. Ubisoft had figured out the formula: a beautiful CGI trailer, a perfect vertical slice of gameplay, a promise. But when The Division launched in 2016, a disappointment for many. Comments flooded in. I actually prefer watching this video than playing the game. But Ubisoft couldn't resist another cash grab. The game felt incomplete. It was a grindy looter shooter, but without a compelling endgame, with the rest of the content locked behind the Season Pass and DLC. Then came the micro-transaction store. Despite assurances from game director Magnus Jensen, who explicitly said, "You cannot spend a little bit of money and fast track to get better gear or pay to win or vanity items, we do not have that." A few patches later, a premium vendor appeared, selling those same vanity items for real money. And yet, it shattered records, the best-selling Ubisoft game at launch, surpassing Watch Dogs. Over 20 million copies were sold. And finally, Rainbow Six Siege.
Alright, I'm taking out the main entrance. Don't panic! Kitchen! Right there! No, we got this. Get her out. I got him! Keep it moving! Shit, I'm dead! Window upstairs, go. Whoa, wait! She's down! I have to revive her! Cover me! I got you! Get out of here!
Another beautifully marketed trailer, a return to the tactical shooter franchise after 6 long years, which, while becoming one of their most successful live service projects, originally launched to mediocre reviews and, of course, egregious microtransactions, but improving with time, retaining and growing a steady player base for a unique multiplayer experience. But by this point, the cycle of overhyped promises, copy-paste design, and under-delivering, coupled with years of aggressive monetization, was about to spell their doom, even as they doubled down further on live services and microtransactions. With the return of a giant, Ubisoft was about to test just how far players and their wallets could be pushed. Assassin's Creed Origins.
They are the first to call themselves the Assassins.
Ubisoft's Montreal's goal was to modernize Assassin's Creed, to lift the series out of the pit that Unity and Syndicate left it in. Inspired by the massive success of The Witcher 3, Assassin's Creed transformed into an RPG-light experience. The combat was reworked, into an action-heavy system. RPG staples like gear, stats, skill trees, and level progression were added, alongside a bigger emphasis on open-world exploration. But the gamble paid off. Origins was a massive success, selling over 10 million copies and bringing both old and new fans into the fold. However, a number of fans voiced concerns over the dilution of the identity of the franchise, calling it Assassin's Creed in name only, not just because of the introduction of the RPG elements, but the increasing focus on its mythological fantasy side, plus the age-old criticism, an even more bloated open world, repetitive side content, and an exhausting gameplay loop.
There's a lot of give and take here and a lot of changes, but one thing absolutely hampered my enjoyment. It's the repetition. Now, it's not based on the collectibles, but it's continued on the Club Med-like enemies, the settlements and the guardhouses that positively choke the environment, with each offering a kill the captain and find some treasure kind of shakedown list, and it continues over and over and over.
And then there was the monetization. By this point, Ubisoft's aggressive pricing models were expected. Tables with multiple editions, time saver packs, cosmetics and maps to reveal in-game secrets. It was interesting. The more time-saving microtransactions they added, the more bloated the game became. But Origins introduced something else. Hecka chests.
But it's also important to not mince words here. The game does technically allow players to pay for loot boxes or gamble for random rewards. Regardless of how unobtrusive or optional they may seem, it's important to acknowledge that paid loot boxes are still there in some form, so that those with addictive tendencies can be wary.
Loot boxes, the industry's most controversial trend, had officially crept its way into Assassin's Creed. Now players didn't just have the option to pay to save time, they could pay for power. While technically avoidable as their other MTX, as the currency was obtained in-game, the introduction of loot boxes through buyable currency raised the previous critical concern. Could Ubisoft really still be trusted to design their games without microtransactions influencing progression and game design? But instead of pulling further back, Ubisoft tripled down. When Assassin's Creed Odyssey launched just a year later, it expanded on Origin's RPG formula, introducing an even larger map, more side activities, and a deeper upgradable gear system. But for some players, it felt excessive, bloated to the point of being deliberately grindy, designed to nudge those with more money than time towards microtransactions, and Ubisoft knew it. When Odyssey launched, some time-saver microtransactions were completely absent for the first month. Later, they even adjusted XP gains from side activities, subtly admitting that the default progression was grindier than it was meant to be. At this point, these tactics weren't just limited to Assassin's Creed, they were spreading everywhere. It became clear with the successes of Origins and Odyssey that mainstream players were engaging heavily with Ubisoft's approach to microtransactions. So much so that for the first time, their microtransaction revenues surpassed the digital sales of actual games. So of course, they were not gonna stop. In 2018, Ubisoft expanded that model into the Far Cry franchise. Far Cry 5 and then New Dawn featured cosmetics, time savers, and even weapons available for purchase. And again, it worked. Far Cry 5 went on to sell millions of copies, becoming the best-selling entry in the series. Then there was For Honor, a bold new IP and a great concept that barely functioned at launch.
Shit netcode, crappy matchmaking, and worst of all, using peer-to-peer connections, all under fucking Uplay. It is infuriating.
On top of bugs and server issues, the game was aggressively monetized. Gamers quickly crunched the numbers and discovered that unlocking everything available would cost over $732, or more than 2.5 years of playtime. Ubisoft did respond directly to this claim with this.
We never had an intention for you to unlock everything in the game.
Keep in mind, this was a full-priced game from $60 to $90. Ultimately, Much like Rainbow Six Siege, For Honor received post-launch support, and with time, balance changes and dedicated servers a year later gave the game a second wind, at least for a little while. This monetization philosophy carried into Ghost Recon Wildlands, Ubisoft's open-world reinvention of the tactical shooter series, and of course, it came with loot boxes. Despite a mixed reception, Wildlands became surprisingly popular, reaching over 15 million players. But it was its sequel, Breakpoint, that would poetically and finally break Ubisoft. Breakpoint in 2019 completely abandoned Ghost Recon's identity of being a single-player tactical military sim to add some looter-shooter elements that could be monetized with XP boosters, time-saver packs, loot boxes, and microtransactions galore.
People say it feels like a game with no unifying vision, but I disagree with that. I think there is a unifying vision, and that vision is monetization. When you view the game through the lens of monetization, all of its weird, confused, out-of-place choices make absolute sense. I think the social hub exists so that players feel pressure to buy cosmetics and emotes with microtransactions. I think the shoehorned RPG mechanics exist because they can so easily be monetized, allowing people to purchase upgrades they want instead of grinding for them, which is exactly how it worked in Far Cry New Dawn and Assassin's Creed Odyssey, by the way. I think the banal daily and weekly missions exist to keep people playing for longer so they can be monetized. I was barely able to craft anything after 6 or 7 hours of play, and I think that stingy economy tuning exists so that it can be monetized.
We had reached a point where monetization was no longer subtle. It was clearly influencing game design, and to its greatest detriment across Ubisoft games. Despite all of this, Yves Guillemot defended Breakpoint's microtransactions, claiming they were entirely optional, just like in all their other games. He even suggested that the store's design was inspired by the successful monetization model of Wildlands, effectively blaming the players for its existence. And to be fair, he wasn't entirely wrong, but Ubisoft wasn't done yet. Not only some microtransactions had to be removed due to backlash, in 2021, Ubisoft pushed even further into predatory practices by jumping on the NFT bandwagon for Breakpoint. Ubisoft Quartz, a service for buying in-game cosmetics as NFTs, was overwhelmingly hated by players. Even Ubisoft employees spoke out against it. In the end, the market rejected the idea entirely. The trade volume was nearly non-existent, and after less than a year, Ubisoft quietly shut down Quartz and its respective digit NFTs, pretending it never happened. Despite all the controversies and backlash up until this point, Ubisoft was making a lot of money. From 2015 to 2018, during the height of microtransactions, amping up general monetization, bloated worlds, broken promises, and broken games, Ubisoft's stock price skyrocketed, going from 15 euros per share to 100 euros per share. So why would a Ubisoft stop? Why would they change anything? So they kept going and going. At the end of the day, making money is a business job. That is acceptable and it is expected. That's why the Guillemots got into the gaming industry in the first place. But when you keep churning out the same products, relying on the same franchises, pumping them out on a yearly basis, while at the same time amping up monetization to squeeze out every last possible cent, consumers should at least expect a functioning product. A game not hampered by its monetization, a game that with all the money and resources behind it, might even revolutionize the industry. But that wasn't happening. At this pace, a breakpoint was inevitable, and it started with Breakpoint. Ubisoft had spread itself too thin, too many franchises, too many games, and too much copy-paste design, where every title blurred together, showing a clear lack of creative risk, while focusing their design decisions on what can be monetized. Ubisoft's reputation and brand were on the verge of collapse. Even Yves Guillemot was forced to admit that Breakpoint disappointed in sales and failed to differentiate itself from the company's other open-world titles, especially considering that The Division 2, while less aggressively monetized, had also underperformed commercially. In response, Ubisoft delayed multiple upcoming projects and vowed to rethink their strategy, but the damage was already done. Their stock price plummeted as their net booking forecast was slashed from 2.2 billion euros to 1.5 billion euros. And while these delays might have been the right move, their underlying strategy wasn't about to change. It was the first long-awaited crack in the empire, and things were only about to get worse, where mediocrity and AAA budgets clashed. But while Ubisoft struggled internally, another battle was brewing, one that could have changed their fate entirely. Vivendi, a French investment giant, had already acquired Gameloft, the mobile free-to-play company, in 2016. Now they set their sights on Ubisoft, attempting a hostile takeover. Desperate to fend them off to stay independent, Ubisoft sought allies, eventually partnering with Tencent, selling 5% of its shares in a deal that not only blocked Vivendi, but also paved the way for Ubisoft's expansion into China's lucrative gaming market. With no path forward, Vivendi backed down, and in the process, Ubisoft and Tencent's close relationship began. But even with this small victory, Ubisoft wasn't out of hot waters yet. By 2020, Ubisoft faced one of its biggest scandals, a wave of sexual misconduct allegations that rocked the company at its core. It started with a forced resignation of Splinter Cell's creative director and vice president of Ubisoft editorial, then several other employees. Reports described Ubisoft's Paris headquarters as feeling like a frat house. Allegations ranged from inappropriate comments and unwanted touching to sexual advances. In one disturbing case, Ubisoft's attempt to compensate the victim wasn't without justice, but with a gift card.
I am truly sorry to everyone who was hurt. We have taken significant steps to remove or sanction those who violated our values and code of conduct, and we are working hard to improve our systems and processes. We are also focused on improving diversity and inclusivity at all levels of the company.
But even as Ubisoft scrambled to repair its image, the company was heading towards its worst financial state in over a decade, buried in debt, suffering from mediocre releases, and losing the trust of players and investors alike. Despite Ubisoft's mounting controversies, none of it was enough to deter fans from their next major release, Assassin's Creed Valhalla. By this point, players knew what to expect, but Valhalla took things to another level. Its sheer size and repetitive grind were widely criticized, with some accusing the game of being artificially prolonged. And yet, none of this stopped it from becoming a financial juggernaut. Thanks to the Viking theme, pandemic-era gaming boom, and the enduring popularity of Assassin's Creed, the game generated over $1 billion in revenue. But that billion-dollar success did little to prevent the disaster that was brewing. Those games, previously delayed before, well, Immortals Phoenix Rising, Ubisoft's attempts at a Zelda-like open-world RPG, launched to a thoroughly mediocre reception. Despite Ubisoft expressing satisfaction with its performance, it wasn't enough to justify a sequel. The project was soon quietly scrapped, and the IP buried. Watch Dogs Legion, following in the footsteps of the divisive Watch Dogs series, boasted an ambitious play-as-anyone system. Despite both past games surpassing 10 million players early on, the game launched in a broken state, riddled with game-breaking bugs and technical issues. The reception was once again mixed, and Ubisoft never disclosed final sales numbers beyond the initial 1.9 million copies in its first days. Reports later surfaced suggesting that the Watch Dogs franchise was effectively dead. Far Cry 6 fared better. Despite lukewarm reviews and little enthusiasm from gamers, the franchise's dedicated player base ensured it crossed the 10 million sales mark. Then came Rainbow Six Extraction, a spin-off of Siege that replaced tactical counter-terror with alien-like creatures. Critics slammed it for feeling uninspired. A whole $60 Rainbow Six game based on a 4-year-old event. While Rainbow Six Siege still maintains a peak of 70,000 to 100,000 players years after launch, Extraction barely broke 2,000 players before fading into irrelevance. Then there was XDefiant, Ubisoft's free-to-play shooter, dead on arrival.
Our goal is to make a best-in-class shooter for you, the players, to compete
and have fun with your friends. It's fast-paced firefights meets punk rock mosh pit.
We're proud to introduce our new game,
Tom Clancy's XDefiant.
The Tom Clancy series went from cool tactical video games based off or inspired from the books to this is a Tom Clancy game because it has a gun. This game was auto-generated by an algorithm. And so, with that reception, it struggled to find an audience and was shut down a year later in June 2025. The goal of becoming #1 was ever so distant. Even Assassin's Creed Mirage, a game that promised a return to the franchise's roots, failed to reignite interest. Despite the nostalgic marketing, it failed to captivate both old and new fans, selling just 5 million copies, on par with Assassin's Creed Syndicate, one of the franchise's weaker-selling entries. Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, from the makers of The Division, received barely any marketing, accumulating just about 2 million players. In terms of revenue, half of what The Division games did in their launch week. And then there was Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, easily one of Ubisoft's most creative and polished releases in years, but suffered from Ubisoft's poor marketing and pricing strategy, with much criticism towards the modern take of the beloved IP. Nothing like some gangster rap to really feel those Prince of Persia vibes. The game barely sold over 1 million copies, and the development team at Ubisoft Montpellier was disbanded shortly after. Beyond Good and Evil 2, still in development hell, announced all the way back in 2008, the game remains in limbo, costing Ubisoft untold millions, with no release date in sight. But the worst of them all, Skull and Bones, a game that promised to take the best elements of Assassin's Creed Black Flag's naval combat and pirate theme and turn it into a full-fledged experience. Instead, it became a development nightmare spanning nearly 10 years. The budget reportedly ballooned to an astronomical $650 to $850 million, far beyond the standard $100 to $300 million for Ubisoft's biggest AAA titles. And yet, the game flopped, selling less than 1 million copies. And through all of this, Ubisoft continued to aggressively monetize its games. CEO Yves Guillemot even justified a Skull and Bones' controversial $70 price tag by calling it a quadruple-A game. Then came Ubisoft's next quadruple-A title, Star Wars Outlaws. Despite its premium pricing and multiple editions, launched in a broken state and received mediocre reviews due to undercooked gameplay. Sales barely surpassed 1 million copies. Meanwhile, Ubisoft's push for its own storefront, Ubisoft Connect, and its Ubisoft Plus subscription only alienated players further. Since 2020, Ubisoft had been pulling its games from Steam, making them exclusives to its own launcher and the Epic Games Store. To make matters worse, reports emerged that Ubisoft had been asking Steam to hide player counts to avoid bad PR. By 2024, Ubisoft's Philippe Tremblay openly stated that players should get used to not owning their games, as he was pushing the company's subscription model as the inevitable future of gaming, mirroring the shift from physical to digital media. Conveniently, a subscription model for a series of games that were designed with monetization in mind, with long and bloated playthroughs. But adding to the topic of not owning our games, back in 2014, when Ubisoft was in their era of overhyping and overpromising these amazing games, the crew was right in a mix, spawning various sequels. However, without warning, the original game would shut down in March 2024. Days later, they started revoking licenses, removing access to the game entirely with no refunds, no offline mode, nothing, even though the code for an offline mode existed. Players were furious, and in November 2024, Matthew Castle and Alan Leo sued Ubisoft for misleading consumers, comparing it to buying a pinball machine only to wake up one day and find all the pieces missing. Even though you paid full price to receive this game, you never knew that the manufacturer could come in one day and, without your control, leave you with a skeleton of what you thought you paid for. Ubisoft then had the audacity to respond by doubling down to dismiss the case, saying that there were no reasons for players to believe they were purchasing unfettered ownership rights in the game. It wasn't just the sales that were in freefall, player sentiment had hit rock bottom. Despite boasting 45 studios worldwide and nearly 20,000 employees, Ubisoft's output was equally bloated. In terms of revenue per employee, Ubisoft lagged behind every other major AAA publisher. And then came the financial reckoning. Ubisoft had flopped over and over again, leading to massive debt. These many disasters were the final straw, and the company's stock collapsed, plummeting from its highs of 80 euros per share down to the 10 euros range. Through various layoffs, employees were also leaving in droves, including Assassin's Creed veterans. Poor wages, mismanagement, poor leadership, constant failures, and rushed releases had driven morale to an all-time low, where work was rarely compensated, even through crunching, a broken workforce that often led to broken games. Ubisoft is an org that uses its budget on numbers, not quality. They get bloated projects with 3 times the needed people of low average experience or ability, such that a lot of work is slow or poorly done. They have divided poor leadership that endlessly debates the same arguments for years. And for being part of all that shit, you get basically no pay relative to your qualifications. I've seen design teams so poorly document their work, they basically have nothing to show for it after years of work. Is the game matching design? Who knows? Ubisoft was no longer just in trouble, it was in a crisis. It was inevitable that then investors' confidence in the company reached an equal all-time low. In a formal letter, shareholders demanded that Yves Guillemot step down as CEO, calling for a complete management shakeup, restructuring, and even the possibility of taking the company private. Ubisoft at the current state is mismanaged, and shareholders are hostages of the Guillemot family members and Tencent, who take advantage of them. Management is focused on pleasing investors with beating quarterly results and not focusing on long-term strategy to provide exceptional experience for the gamers. Something had to change. Something had to happen. But before any major decisions could be made, Ubisoft had one last gamble, one final hope to sway investors and turn public perception around. Assassin's Creed Shadows.
We are the Shadows.
Although Assassin's Creed Shadows was a crucial game for Ubisoft's financials, it immediately bred a controversy. Despite taking place in feudal Japan, a setting fans had begged for over a decade, Ubisoft's decision to portray Yasuke as a supposed legendary African samurai was met with mixed reactions. Some dismissed the criticism, arguing that Assassin's Creed had always been historical fiction. Others accused Ubisoft of twisting history, questioning how the company's so-called researchers and historians justified the portrayal. What should have been a triumphant setting for the franchise instead sparked a divisive debate. And that was by far not the only problem. Assassin's Creed Shadows stumbled at every possible turn. Ubisoft found itself using copyrighted material, selling merchandise featuring sensitive symbols like a one-legged torii-gate reminiscent of the one found in Nagasaki, the town that was hit by a nuclear blast in 1945, violating Japan's strict cultural guidelines over its use of real shrines and letting them be destroyed, two much-needed delays, and so much more. The controversy escalated so far that the game was even discussed in Japan's national diet. The Japanese officials then later even published a video stating that Ubisoft had remained silent, unable to reply to their concerns. Ubisoft was no stranger to backlash from various countries, but this time, the controversy was bigger than ever before. Ultimately, and despite it, the game saw a positive reception among many longtime fans, reaching 3 million players in its first week. This included both sales and Ubisoft Plus subscriptions. However, many players remained lukewarm, calling Shadows yet another aggressively mediocre Ubisoft title, with many of the same issues as before.
Players can buy weapons and armor with real money, not cosmetics, but legendary equipment with actual stats and unique passives. Upon reviewing the store, I realized just how much of Ubisoft's game design is dictated by its monetization. The game's economy is deliberately restrictive to encourage spending. They slow you down in hopes that you spend more. The entire design is built around inconvenience just to sell you a solution. And I think that's their Achilles heel. That's the root to all of their evils. Why wasn't this talked about in a single review? Ubisoft games are not designed as games, they're designed as marketing attractions.
Shadows was just a continuation of everything that was wrong with Ubisoft for more than a decade. But this time, it wasn't the massive financial hit they desperately needed, and with that failure, rumors of deals surrounding its IPs and Tencent finally became a reality. On March 27, 2025, Ubisoft announced the creation of a new subsidiary, with Tencent acquiring a 25% stake through a 1.16 billion euros investment at a valuation of 4 billion euros. This new identity was worth more than Ubisoft itself. Its sole purpose? To safeguard the company's most profitable crown jewels, Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Rainbow Six, while the parent company struggles to manage the other less successful IPs, leaving many beloved franchises like Splinter Cell or Prince of Persia further in the limbo. Yves Guillemot framed it as a necessary evolution, stating, "This is a foundational leap in changing Ubisoft's operating model that will enable us to be both agile and ambitious." As for Martin Lau, Tencent president, we see the immense potential for these franchises to evolve into long-term evergreen game platforms and create engaging new experiences for gamers. Ubisoft managed to delay the inevitable, separating the good apples from the rotten ones, at least for now. But not everyone was happy. Investors sent yet another formal letter, this time demanding that the deal be renegotiated, an extraordinary dividend to be sent, but also exclude Tencent from voting and limit the Guillemot family-owned voting rights. This comes off the back of Ubisoft's stock plummeting to yet new lows in the week following the announcement over its uncertainty to what it meant to Ubisoft as a whole. Meanwhile, studios and employees braced for what had become an unavoidable reality: layoffs, closures, and more uncertainty about what would be left standing when the dust settled. But I want to leave you with this. Ubisoft's controversies and its crumbling reputation didn't start 2 years ago, or even 5 years ago. These issues have been brewing for over a decade, and yet, despite everything, the broken launches, the microtransactions influencing game design, the overpromising and under-deliveries. People still bought, people still played, and people still found themselves disappointed. But they kept buying. It took years of failures for those disappointments to finally turn into poor sales, forcing Ubisoft to make at least some changes. But if Shadows and Far Cry 6 are any indication, these franchises aren't going anywhere anytime soon. The Guillemets built their business on supply and demand, first in software and hardware, and later in video games. They pushed out yearly releases because there was the demand. They added micro-transactions because there was the demand. Their games were overhyped and under-delivered, yet they still sold. Their monetization schemes were resented, yet they still worked. So after everything, after all the anti-consumer practices, the corporate greed, and the damage done to their employees, shareholders, and players' trust, if people continue to buy, is the fault really only on the company and its management, or is it on the consumer who keeps engaging in these same purchases? Or both? I'll leave that question to you. But if you've grown tired of giving Ubisoft your hard-earned cash, maybe it's time to spend it on something a little bit more satisfying, like some gamer subs. They are keto-friendly, sugar-free energy drinks, available in both caffeinated and non-caffeinated options, with a ton of awesome flavors to choose from. And yeah, they got waifu cups. Why the hell not? If you want to support the channel beyond just subscribing, which is already amazing, you can use my code SELWIN at checkout or click the link in the description for 10% off. Thanks for watching, and happy gaming.